Testing, testing, 1, 2, test. 1, 2, 3, testing. Test, 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 1, 2, 1, 2, testing. Not hearing? Oh, there you go. Right. Okay, good. Test, 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 test. 1, 2, 1, 2. How are you doing? You got yours? Test, test, test. Okay. Okay, one more. Test, test, test. Yes, got it? Okay.
Get friendlier. Your Chuck is out there on an island.
Well, why don't we put 3 on this side? How about if we turn to the side? Try and get Holly down here.
Ready to go? Good morning. My name is Carrie Geithner. I'm an El Paso County Commissioner representing District 2. I'm also the Vice Chair of the Board of County Commissioners. I'd like to thank my fellow El Paso County Commissioners, countywide elected officials and organization representatives from across the state who have traveled here today to support us for this important announcement. Last year, a broad bipartisan coalition of county, municipal, and business organizations opposed Senate Bill 22-230, which thrust county employees into the failing and costly throes of unionization. We warned the legislature and the governor that such misguided policy would jeopardize the fiscal health of counties and diminish the level of services we can offer to our citizens. Citizens rightfully expect someone to plow roads during a snowstorm, answer 911 calls, and protect the young and the elderly from abuse. Injecting collective bargaining and unions into local government is another layer of bureaucracy that keeps citizens from these life-saving services. Unionization is as necessary as it is expensive. For the same cost as our most conservative estimates of the impact of unionization, counties could repair a significant number of roads or hire dozens more deputies to patrol our county. To add insult to injury, this proposal came as El Paso County responded to what the free market was already telling us. We allocated millions more in pay and benefits to retain employees without a big union threat to our operations to make sure that employees are fairly compensated and we can compete to keep our quality employees to best serve residents and taxpayers. Unfortunately, the majority of the General Assembly and the governor listened to the extreme elements of their base instead of the bipartisan coalition who said, "This is bad, poorly drafted policy." The bill was signed into law, and almost instantly, union representatives began harassing and intimidating our county employees to join their failing organizations, lurking outside of county buildings, confronting them at their homes, leading some to consider filing harassment reports to law enforcement. Today, my fellow commissioners and I unanimously approved a resolution to file a declaratory judgment against the state for imposing a significant unfunded mandate, which has forced an overreach of county commissioner authority into the independent countywide elected offices, including the sheriff, district attorney, clerk and recorder, and others. This unfunded mandate means our local residents' tax dollars pay for union elections, collective bargaining, and a significant increase in legal and administrative staff to negotiate, approve, and manage agreements. This will divert millions of dollars away from programs and services our citizens expect. All because the state wants to enact policy without the consequence of the costs it produces. If the state doesn't want to pay for the policies they create, our citizens shouldn't be forced to sacrifice services or pay more for those same services, particularly when Colorado Springs taxpayers rejected unionization of public employees at the ballot box in 2019. The impact of this legislation is real. What it will do to our organization is real, and it doesn't stop there. To explain more about the impact of this bill and why this litigation is necessary, I'd like to invite the El Paso County Clerk and Recorder, Steve Schleicher, to speak.
Thank you, Commissioner. Folks, Commissioner Geithner is right. Members of the public expect employees like mine to be there to answer the call. That's not hyperbole. Along with all the other negative impacts Commissioner Geithner has already outlined, this unionization law is problematic for another reason. It grants broad and overreaching powers to county commissioners to dictate how independent elected officials like myself run their office. County commissioners do not control elected officials like the district attorney, sheriff, coroner, clerk and recorder, assessor, treasurer, or the surveyor. Yet this bill gives commissioners authority to approve a union contract for my employees. This lawsuit is important because it seeks a declaratory judgment to right this obvious wrong. If successful, not only would elected offices like mine get the proper treatment they deserve, but other life-saving agencies would be exempt as well. Citizens needing a district attorney's office, a sheriff's deputy, or assistance through the Department of Human Services, or a business owner needing a restaurant inspection by public health, or a recently laid off person needing the Pikes Peak Workforce Center should not have their needs caught up in an ugly back and forth with unions because the legislature tried to lump these other entities into the same organization run by county commissioners. And there's something worse about all of this. My office is over at the Citizen Service Center off Guard of the Gods, where there are hundreds of county employees. Since this law has passed, I, as your clerk and recorder, have received numerous complaints of union representatives harassing employees as they enter our building to come to work, pressuring them to join a union. I've even heard reports of union representatives showing up to people's homes and harassing them to the point where the employee thought they would have to call law enforcement. These reports are very concerning to me and creates confusion among elected officials and employees about how we fulfill this unfunded mandate. Commissioners, I, as your clerk and recorder, commend you for continuing to represent not only our county, but counties and elected offices statewide by leading on this issue. Next, I'd like to introduce County Commissioner Kevin Grantham from Fremont County to speak about the need for this lawsuit. Mr. Grantham.
Thank you, Commissioner Geithner and Clerk and Recorder Schleicher. I agree with everything that's been said here today. Counties were singled out by the legislature to make good on an election year promise, remarkably enough, to a special interest group. Now local governments are being forced to shoulder huge financial costs at the expense of our services to our residents. The Colorado General Assembly saw the additional workload this legislation would place on the state and allocated over $400,000 to the Department of Labor and Employment to carry out some administrative functions. However, that same fiscal note for the unionization clearly shows that the impact to counties will be over $30 million. And the legislature declined to allocate any funds to counties to absorb that cost. This will require counties who have limited budgets to spend millions on collective bargaining mandates rather than toward core county services for residents. Now, none of this is new information to the Colorado legislature, but it may be new information for everyone who relies on county government for protection, justice, assistance, and to exercise their right to vote. As a commissioner, I was part of that coalition that fought to oppose this legislation, Colorado Counties Incorporated. Our association that consists of Republican, Democratic, and unaffiliated commissioners opposed this bill. So did a broad group of people and organizations who weren't directly impacted by the new law because they understood the negative impact unionizing counties would have on all of our services. But even with that loud of a voice, some elected leaders in Denver chose to listen to a special interest group. We were not provided funding to administer union elections, negotiate a collective bargaining agreement, or engage in ongoing union negotiations. We were also faced with either violating the Collective Bargaining for Counties Act or violating Colorado's Constitution as it pertains to inherent powers of county-wide elected officials. The legislature has placed us in an impossible position, and seeking a declaration from the courts is our only option. I commend El Paso County Commissioners and their staff for their leadership on this issue, and I fully support this lawsuit and call upon all of my fellow county commissioners statewide to consider how they can support this action. Commissioner.
Thank you to everyone for being here today. As elected leaders, we care about our residents, our taxpayers, and our employees, who are often one and the same. We care deeply about providing impactful services to our residents and doing our jobs. The unionization bill mandates that counties do the exact opposite and at the expense of local services. The Collective Bargaining for Counties Act places government unions in a position in which they are unaccountable to taxpayers and, unlike their private sector counterparts, are not accountable to the free market. Taxpayers were purposefully cut out of the process because the legislature knows voters agree with us. A clarifying court order is crucial for us to operate legally in the wake of a misguided policy thrust upon us by the majority of the Colorado General Assembly. We likewise want to thank those members of the Colorado General Assembly who understand the impact this legislation will have on counties and fought hard to stop it. With that, we'll take any questions, and I'd like to point out we have folks from several different jurisdictions. Obviously, we've heard from Kevin Grantham. We also have Chris Richardson, a county commissioner from Elbert County. Obviously, Stan Vanderwerf from El Paso. We also have Representative Don Wilson, who represents eastern part of El Paso County, as well as Monument. We also have, and I'm going to not say your last title, our treasurer, Chuck Broerman, and obviously we've also heard from Steve Schleicher. Absolutely, and we have a full analysis that we did that we can get you when this bill was going through the legislature, but the estimate is in the millions, and we are looking at having to potentially hire additional attorneys, folks in the HR department, all kinds of administrative work that is required to make sure that we are in compliance with a complex set of regulations, rulemaking that is still taking place. All of those additional employees, the time that it takes to do all of that, and there's a lot of uncertainty around how long that bargaining could take place. Again, we're still waiting for the rulemaking process to finish up. Yes.
Funded mandate. So I'm just wondering what current or past legislators at the state level can talk about. Have you guys been aware of kind of the displeasure that this county in particular has had with unfunded mandates? What was the discussion about that, and why does that frustration seem to continue to exist here?
I will gladly speak to that one. I've worn both hats. I will tell you that in my 8 years up there, we fought hard against putting any bill forward that would put more burden on our counties, on our cities, on all of our local governments. In fact, there is still a standing executive order from former governor, current U.S. Senator John Hickenlooper, against unfunded mandates to local governments. An executive order that is still currently being broken to this day by this current legislature over the last 5 years. So in my current position, going from the Senate and the legislature to the county commission, the expectation is that we default to a legislature that would honor our history, honor precedent in this state, that we do not overburden our local governments with legislation, with mandates. And it seems that the exact opposite has been happening for the last 5 years. They're going out of their way to put more burden on the backs of local taxpayers, taking away their ability to pave roads, to grade roads, to offer services in our human services department. All of these things take away bit by bit and chip away at our ability to provide the simplest and most direct services to the citizens of our counties. Is that going to change on the state level? Only if there's a change in government up there in the state. Because right now the emphasis is completely and wholly on what they can put on the backs of local governments. This is but one example of that, where they're burdening us instead of themselves, all for a political cause.
You know, I concur with most, with everything said here, and that was one of the reasons I became moved to the state level is, as a mayor, the mayor of Town of Monument, I saw how much the state policies were causing harm to our local entities and their ability to take care of what they need to take care of. When you're talking some of our smaller communities and half our staff is our police department, we have to take care of the cost, the public safety that goes along with that. And when you start putting unfunded mandates down, it creates a new burden that takes away from your public safety, your roads, your streets. And we've seen this get more and more common over the past couple of years. And I'm very supportive of El Paso County for stepping up and saying, hey, we cannot continue to do policies like this. So I thank our county commissioners for doing this.
Feel like, from the county perspective, do you feel like more of the county employees do, that the majority of county employees do or don't want to be unionized?
Yes, thank you. Stan Van Werf, El Paso County Commissioner for right here and representing the West Side. You know, I think you would have to speak to them and ask them that question, but I can tell you there is frustration amongst many of the employees about some of the harassment that they have received now. My fellow Commissioner Geithner, and others have mentioned these kinds of things. But I really want to focus on some broader things that I think are really important, that are critical to what's happening and has happened in my 6 years as County Commissioner. We've been fighting centralization of authority that seems to be important to the state legislature, and also the passing of unfunded mandates. You know, we have a very limited budget in local government, and we need to use those dollars for local services. So when the state legislature writes an unfunded mandate, another unfunded mandate, and another one, they're taking those dollars away from local government to address whatever their particular interests are. I am asking the state legislature, if they wish to do something, use state taxpayer dollars. Do not use local money. We've got roads to fix. We've got public safety to address, and we need to ensure those are fully funded so that we can have a good and safe and viable community with effective local transportation. We ask them to keep their hands off our local tax dollars. Thank you.
I understand that this wasn't a surprise, that you guys knew that this bill was going through the process. And I imagine you had somebody from the county go up to try to lobby against passage of this bill. Can you talk about the process behind that?
We absolutely did do that. And we did that through several processes. One was directly in a testimony from El Paso County. We have a lobbyist up there that keeps us apprised of what is going on. But we also, as was stated by Commissioner Geithner, did this through CCI. And we had a universal support, almost a universal support from Colorado Counties Incorporated opposing this. And it's important to realize this was bipartisan opposition to this particular bill. We had Democrats, independents, and Republican commissioners that were not interested in this. And it's predominantly because when the state legislature writes legislation that then consumes local money, then the local elected officials cannot use those dollars to fix roads or to ensure that we have public safety.
Nation about, despite the opposition, well, it seems to be pretty heavy opposition to this, that the legislature decided to pass it anyway.
Well, I will defer to Commissioner Geithner if she wishes to answer that, but I can tell you that I did not, I don't think we've been afforded in many of these bills, not just this bill, but in other bills, a true, honest, no kidding, statewide discussion, a true, honest, stakeholdering process so that the issues and concerns of local government across the state can actually be addressed. This doesn't seem to be taking place in sufficient quantity for what I believe is appropriate. And I would encourage the state legislature to do more of that.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to touch on one of the first questions that you had around, what we think employees are considering. I do want to point out that this This law also requires counties to hand over the contact information of employees to union agencies. That is something that we've seen a concern from employees. In fact, we've had about 450 employees already ask us to opt out, which they are able to do. And so we do know that there are some concerns about those contacts and future contacts. That information has not been required to be turned over quite yet. The deadline is still coming on that, but somehow we still do have those union representatives reaching out. So where they're getting that information from, is still a little bit up in the air. But in terms of the passage of this bill and why, even with the bipartisan opposition, that it continued to move forward, I think Commissioner Grantham stated a little bit of this. This is a political move. It was very clear and in the public that there was essentially a statement made by union organizations that they were going to withhold campaign contributions to Democrats unless there were some changes made. That was very front and center in the public eye during these conversations. We saw lots of union representatives around the Capitol working against many of the amendments that we were putting forward. So I do believe that that was very significant, and those pressures were very significant. And rather than listen to good policy decision, again, here we have ended up with a very unclear policy that is causing a lot of problems for counties.
Legislation?
There is a rollout of certain things, but I believe July 1st is the implementation date that we are looking for the potential for these units to form. Around 3,000.
Most of them over at the Citizen Service Center?
I don't think that most of them are. They're divided up in several different areas, but we could get you better numbers on that after.
Carrie, tell me this. What is it specifically that you're asking the legislature to do? Are you asking them to rescind the legislation, or are you asking them to take over the funding of the mandate?
That's not really for me to say here. I think that what we're focused on today here is about this declaratory judgment. We're asking the courts to help us sort out what this legislation means for us because it is so unclear and conflicting. I also want to make sure we also have a county commissioner from Elbert County, which is obviously a smaller county here at El Paso County. Of course, we are very concerned about the costs, but as you might imagine, we have a lot of very small counties who are even more dramatically impacted by that. So I just want to make sure you have the opportunity to find out about that perspective as well.
Or would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Commissioner Richardson, I'm the chair of the Elbert County Board of County Commissioners. We are a small county when compared to El Paso, but I guess a large one when you're looking at this legislation, which did exclude any counties below a population of 7,500. We have 27,000 and about 200 employees that care for those. So Commissioner Grantham had mentioned Colorado Counties, Inc. It's an organization of 61 counties in the state, representing the vast majority of the population of the state. And we come together because we focus on three things generally. No unfunded mandates, having a seat at the table, and there's always a third thing. Unfunded mandates, a seat at the table, and local control. Thank you. We live and breathe it. I just can't say it sometimes. But this bill pretty much violated all of those. It does wrestle local control from us. It presents unfunded mandates, and we certainly did not have a seat at the table. There was a lot of discussion. Broad brushstrokes was the term used during this legislative session, but we never saw the legislation until the very end of the session when it was ready to be introduced. As a body, CCI had unanimity in a vote against the concept, and then almost nearly total unanimity once the bill was dropped. It is payback for unions. In its initial concept, it included higher education, special districts, I believe there were some others, and slowly, one by one, every other type of government entity in the state was peeled off, with the exception of counties, and I believe there was some comfort there, as were administrative units of the state. But our employees understand what we're operating with.
I don't see a move for unionization because they know there's no more money. I mean, we scrap for every dime. We do our best to take care of folks. Over the last few years, we have addressed pay discrepancies, almost a 30% pay raise across the board over now a 3-year period. So we take care of our folks. We don't need others coming in to tell us how to take care of people. So with that.
Did you say that this legislation affects larger counties and not smaller counties?
Yes, those under 7,500 in population were excluded. I believe that's 14 to 20 counties, not
Why?
to give something, I'd assume, but there's, in counties of that size, the legislation requires bargaining units of 50 people or more. Likely they don't have 50 employees. I can't speak for them, but that would be my guess. Thank you.
I would like to.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I chime in on that 7,500 and less? It was a concession in order to garner certain votes, but the 7,500 and below is also an admission by the sponsors of this bill that it more negatively affects counties the smaller that they are because of their budgets. It's an admission included in the bill through an amendment that it greatly affects smaller counties and excluded them because it could literally bankrupt some of the smaller counties. They wouldn't have anything left after they had to pay just the straight up dollar amounts for the union collective bargaining bills that all of us will end up having to pay. And a county our size, a county of Commissioner Richardson's size, Fremont County is about 49,000. And the costs are going to be essentially, I would imagine, probably pretty close to the same for Elbert and for Fremont. And Elbert has half of the population. And I would imagine a similar budget. But the costs, the hard costs will probably be next to the same. The smaller the county gets, the rougher it's going to be on them to try to make ends meet with this collective bargaining coming down the hill. So I see that as a complete admission to the problem of the bill when they excluded the county 7,500 and less.
Lawsuit isn't successful, then what and how soon, I guess? What happens then and how soon will counties start feeling the financial impact of this? Or can you even say or talk about that at this point?
It's very difficult to say right now because we are in a wait and see perspective because it takes effect on July 1st. There's still rulemaking going on, but essentially employees would vote to join a bargaining unit. And so we don't know for sure when any of that would come about. You know, we've heard from others and I've said, you know, we do everything that we can to make sure we're taking care of our employees. We want to be competitive with the market. We know that they are the key to great services. At the same point, you've also heard mentioned very aggressive recruiting tactics. Those very aggressive recruiting tactics could lead to unionizing earlier. And so, again, we just don't really have the answers to those things right now, which is one of the things that makes it very difficult for us to plan for. But again, that's why I also say those tactics say to me that this is not an internal, this is not dissatisfied employees internally who are doing this on their own. We have outside forces who are coming in and trying to create that situation here, which to me says that we could potentially see a speed up of that process.
You've mentioned the bipartisan opposition to this legislation, but do you have any like actual hard numbers to how wide that opposition is in terms of number of counties and county commissioners and across the political spectrum?
So I don't have an exact breakdown of each county that participates in CCI. I'm going to refer, I think we were over a 70%, maybe close to an 80% of the 62 counties that are represented and members of CCI. So, I mean, there's a pretty broad group there, and certainly we could get you the makeup of those counties. But we certainly had that. We also had the support of CML, Colorado Municipal League, which is made up of most cities and towns in Colorado as well. They stood with us even though they were not specifically named because, again, as was mentioned, there were times that the rumors of this bill, we really didn't know who was going to be swept up into it. They also have similar concerns to what we have, and quite frankly are very concerned that we were the first step in on this, and then there will be a secondary step to add in others. And again, they would have many of the same concerns around the unfunded mandate piece. That represents so many cities is also bipartisan. I'm sure that we could also help get in touch with CML and find out what their makeup was as well.
And just to be clear, the majority of the anger over this legislation is the unfunded mandate segment, correct?
I think that is, there are really two things that we're focusing on for this declaratory judgment. One is that unfunded mandate, absolutely. The second one is the basically the situation that commissioners are in as being forced to say we're going to overreach into other elected officials' employees, because currently they get to set what the salaries are, all of those pieces regarding their own employees, and this is asking us to bargain on their behalf, which seems a conflict, and that's really what we're asking the courts to clarify. It seems that there's a conflict with this legislation that was passed in the Constitution.
Do you guys know if unionization of county employees is common or uncommon in counties elsewhere? Do we know?
Across the U.S.? I think we'd have to look at that a little bit more. I don't know. I know that for many years there was a widely held bipartisan idea, going back to past presidents that always really focused in on the difference between private and public unions. And there has always been a lot of concern across the aisle, again, from the local to the national level, about public unions and the kind of effect that they can have. It's just a different situation when you require and citizens deserve services that may not be able to be fulfilled. Thank you. All right. Thank you very much for being here today.